think it is acceptable to do the same? Sarcasm. This is the use of words that are the opposite of what you mean in order to be unpleasant to someone or to make fun of them. Mary, you are God's gift to creation. You really are. Why don't you take a look at the passage from Great Expectations and see which of the devices you can identify. Now that you have sharpened your comprehension skills, here are some key techniques to practice during examinations. Read the passage carefully, at least twice. Read the question carefully and be sure to answer what is asked. If you are asked, for example, to quote a phrase, do just that. Do not write the entire sentence. Unless you are asked to quote, always use your own words. Sometimes the question directs you to a particular paragraph. Heed the direction. If you are asked to quote a simile from the first paragraph and you give one from the second, you have not answered correctly, even if you have correctly identified a simile. Write all your answers in complete sentences. Use the marks allocated as a guide to how detailed your response should be. Make sure you give answers that are complete and thorough, especially when you are providing explanations. Attempt all questions. Work within the suggested time frame. And my parting words to you, remember, practice makes perfect. If you want to do well on this section or any other section of your exam, you must practice. You must practice diligently. And until next time, take care. I'm Fiona Porter Lawson.
We're going to yet. So you like your party going for plantation night here? You know nothing much about it.
How you ask man? I think sell off you know. A beer, girl, food, liquor. Me say yes and dead youth.
So like it sell off.
Why may I tell you have a little selector you know? The man of me say Q man. I tell you.
You know sir Sherry make me know the start.
Boy a girl here for lower still in a long time may I tell you about. To each his own, you see me?
You think you have been watching two individuals chatting about the latest party, and you have, but you have also listened to a summary of the evening's proceedings. You see, we summarize every day. When someone asks what happened in class yesterday, you give a summary. When you get the latest source or gossip, you are told a story that's been summarized. So what's different when we write a summary? Hopefully not too much. Let's have a look. When you summarize, your main goals are to identify the main ideas, identify important supporting ideas, create important links between these ideas, and to do all of the above carefully and concisely without changing the meaning of the passage you summarize. It is also very important to use transitional phrases or link words to add coherence. You should never include your own interpretation of the given passage or extract. And that is what you do in a nutshell. Let's look at how you do it. First, read the passage once to get a general idea of the content. Then read it a second time. This time, try to figure out what the writer's purpose is. This will be helpful because we can often confuse what a writer says if we don't understand his intention for writing. So think about whether the writer is trying to inform you about something or to persuade you to purchase a product by talking about its benefits, or if he is criticizing someone or something and holding it up for ridicule. Next, look out for the main points. One good thing to remember is that there is usually only one main point in a paragraph. And remember, the main point may be stated in the paragraph, or sometimes we have to infer what the main idea is from the details provided in the entire paragraph. Next, are there any supporting points that may also be important? After you have identified all the important points, combine them in a logical, coherent paragraph. Do not lift entire sentences from the original and rewrite them. Use your own words. Be on the lookout for and be careful to avoid the following. Examples or illustrations. Although Kimo is only 15 years old, he has been the primary caregiver and breadwinner for his brothers and sisters since his parents died from HIV/AIDS 5 years ago. This is an example, and examples are used to support the main point. So what you need to do is to figure out what the main point is. You should have something like this. Children orphaned by HIV/AIDS work to care for younger siblings. Statistics have shown that 3 out of every 10 persons in the Caribbean will be infected by the HIV virus by 2014. Now this is really just trying to prove a main point, and that is that more people in the Caribbean are becoming infected with the AIDS virus. Repetition. Here's an example of repetition. HIV/AIDS is fast becoming one of the more deadly diseases. It poses a serious threat to the health and lives of people in modern societies. Even though both sentences are worded differently, they present the same idea and there is no reason to repeat it. Now we also avoid figurative language. Look at this example. HIV/AIDS has waved its deathly wand, striking millions within the last 20 years. The correct way to represent this idea would be to say, HIV/AIDS has killed many persons within the last 2 decades. Having said all of that, let's put it to practical use and look at some examples. Listen to this.
The approach of reforming the police force was used successfully in the 1990s in New York, Boston, and Cali, Colombia. The strategy is widely known as the zero tolerance strategy, and it means that you have a strict policing regimen which pays attention to crime, period, over modest, from loitering to murder. It is policed, it is law enforced, and it is prosecuted vigorously. Anything, no criminal activity over modest should be tolerated in society.
Were you able to identify the speaker's main point? How about this? Can you identify the writer's main point in this extract? In spite of his apparent rebellion, the adolescent desperately needs and wants his parents. He is under a lot of pressure within his peer group. Many of the values which he appears to be advocating now are not really the result of his own decision-making, but are a result of peer pressure. The adolescent is insecure, and by way of coping, he puts on an exaggerated image of security. When his self-image has taken a nosedive, he needs the emotional support of people who love him in order to re-establish his self-esteem. From Less Stress by Dr. Gillian Melgosa. The writer's main point is that adolescents, even when they seem rebellious, need their parents' emotional support to cope with the increased feelings of insecurity. If you think about it, that's all you would really need to say about this entire paragraph. The rest of the paragraph is merely reinforcing and supporting his central or main idea. Let's do another. Does a fish know it's wet? Influential cultural and media critic Marshall McLuhan would often ask. The answer, he would say, is no. The fish's existence is so dominated by water that only when water is absent is the fish aware of its condition. So it is with people and mass media. The media so fully saturate our everyday lives that we are often unconscious of their presence, not to mention their influence. Media inform us, entertain us, delight us, annoy us. They move our emotions, challenge our intellects, insult our intelligence. Media often reduce us to mere commodities for sale to the highest bidder. Media help define us. They shape our realities. And this is taken from Introduction to Mass Media by Stanley Barron. I hope you got it. The writer's main point is found in the middle of the paragraph, that media play such an integral part of our daily lives that we are unaware of their influence and presence. The first few sentences really create an analogy to show just how surrounded we are by media influences. The last 4 sentences list ways in which media influence and shape us. I hope you see that if you can sum up the main idea of each paragraph in 1 or 2 clear sentences, this summary writing thing becomes a lot easier. Then, you simply combine all these ideas in 1 or 2 paragraphs and ta-da! summary. One other thing that is vital for you to remember is to pay attention to the question that you are asked. Sometimes you are asked to do very specific things, like point out benefits or advantages or disadvantages of something. You may be asked to list the reasons that are given for the cause of something. In cases like this, do not attempt to summarize the entire passage. Just present the information that is required of you concisely. Let's look at another passage. What are the benefits of massage presented by the writer? Massage is a form of structured touch. The hands, or sometimes other parts of the body, such as the forearms or elbows, are used to glide over the skin and to apply pressure to the muscles underneath in a series of movements that involve stroking, rubbing, kneading, and pressing. The therapeutic benefits produced by massage include loosening of muscular tension and firming the muscles and stimulating blood circulation through the body. Improved blood circulation improves the appearance of the skin, which has a positive mental effect. Massage affects the nerves as well as the muscles, acting on the nervous system to produce a general feeling of relaxation. Massage works on the muscles and can affect the fibrous tissue surrounding the joints, but any skeletal problems will need to be dealt with separately. It is certainly not a cure-all, but it can help enormously through relaxation, helping the body to restore its natural balance. Do you remember the question? What are the benefits of massage? Why don't we go ahead and list them? Releases muscular tension, firms and tones muscles, improves blood circulation, which causes better looking skin, relaxes nerves, helps create balance in the body. Let us now look at how we would connect these ideas so they form a nice, fluid paragraph. The therapeutic benefits of massage include lessening of muscular tension, toned, firm muscles, better blood circulation, which leads to better looking skin, a general feeling of relaxation, and improved balance in the body. And we did it in 33 words. You will notice that we have a nicely written sentence. It is never acceptable to use phrases or clauses in place of sentences in a summary. You are still expected to have a well-written paragraph. An important skill we have to master in order to improve our summaries is writing concisely. By this, I mean that we don't use unnecessary words. This takes a little practice, but I will show you some ways you can easily eliminate wordiness from your writing. A redundant word or expression is one that repeats the same idea unnecessarily. You know them: reverse back, cooperate together, free gift, period in time. To reverse is to go back, so the word back is not needed. To cooperate is to work together, so the word together certainly just repeats the idea unnecessarily. Do you ever pay for a gift? Or is a gift by its very definition free? And that period must be in time, right? Replace phrases with words. Instead of saying, due to the fact that I am unemployed, I must spend wisely, say, I must spend wisely because I am unemployed, which is more concise. Or, I must spend wisely since I am unemployed, also more concise. You will find that many of the phrases that we commonly use can be replaced with one or two words. Let's quickly look at some examples. Avoid certain sentence constructions. Sentences which start with there is or there are and it is and they are. There are 3 men standing at the window. 3 men are standing at the window. Second is obviously more concise than the first. It is my mother who makes dinner in the evenings. Mother makes dinner in the evenings. More concise. They are the ones who stole the artifacts from the museum. They stole the artifacts from the museum. Same idea, just more concise. Avoid sentences which use the passive voice. An example of the passive: her hair is combed by her aunt, versus her aunt combs her hair. The students are taught by their teacher to care for animals, passive. The teacher teaches her students to care for animals, more concise. Avoid sentences which use nouns to form verbs where verbs can be used. Look at this example. The doctor performed a thorough examination of his patient. The doctor thoroughly examined his patient, which is shorter. The dance troupe did a performance of their favorite item to close the show. The dance troupe performed their favorite item to close the show. Another strategy you can use is to avoid verb phrases. That is, verbs which use to plus the verb. Look at this example. The old woman appears to be sick. The old woman appears sick. The first thing I have to do today is to find out the meeting time. The first thing I must do today is to find out the meeting time. Sometimes by combining sentences, we eliminate wordiness. Joshua urgently wanted to buy a car. He knew that buying a car would allow him to access cheaper housing outside of the city, 24 words. Joshua urgently wanted to buy a car which would allow him access to cheaper housing outside of the city, 19 words. Being able to apply these rules when you are revising your summary will help you to stay within the word limit. So now that we have looked at techniques you can use to master the art of writing summaries, let's look at the questions you should ask yourself when revising your summary. Have I responded to what the question has asked? Have I identified the main ideas and combined them in a logical, fluid manner? Have I omitted all unnecessary details, examples, statistics, and repetition? Have I used clear, concise language? Have I presented only the key ideas found in the original without including my own views? Have I used my own words? Have I presented my summary in a properly organized paragraph that has a clear beginning, middle, and end? I hope you found this lesson informative. Thank you for joining me. I'm Fiona Porter Lawson. See you next time. Stories. We have all heard or told a few before. And though there are stories based on facts or actual events, the word story usually implies the telling of fictional or made-up events. But for the purposes of this lesson, we will define a story as a piece of fiction that narrates a series of related events. So now that we understand what a story is, we can go on to define short story. Simply put, a short story is a brief work of fiction that focuses on one primary experience. We are going to, as you can imagine, get into what makes up a story. And I'm sure you all know the most obvious element of story writing, which is the plot. Very simply, the plot is what happens in the story and how the things that happen are revealed. But a good plot has dimensions, highs and lows. Some moments in a story have to be more exciting and thrilling than others. And the good story writer has to create a careful build-up to those climactic moments. So if we were to diagram a plot, it should look something like this. Now, Every good short story has at the center of its plot a conflict or a problem. There are two main types of conflict, internal conflict and external conflict. Internal conflict is where a character comes into conflict with himself or herself. Maybe he or she has carried out some action in the past which has now come back to haunt him or her. Perhaps the character is dealing with some personal hurt or loss. Or maybe the character realizes that he or she needs to change some bad habits or practices. All of these are examples of ways the character can come into conflict with himself or herself. External conflict can come in the form of conflict with another person or situation. A person who is wrongfully accused finds himself in conflict with another character. A woman who tries to find employment in an area that employs only men comes into conflict with a situation. We can also have conflicts against nature or the environment, as in the case of storms or forest fires or earthquakes or a terrible drought. Whatever type of conflict you choose, the important thing is that you develop it so that the action moves through a build-up of excitement to a climax and comes to an ending. At the introduction of your story, you present your characters, setting, and provide whatever background information your audience needs to fully appreciate the story. As the action rises, the conflict becomes clear and the action intensifies as obstacles or problems are presented. The climax forms the most interesting part of the story. This is where the tension is greatest, but it is also the beginning of the turning point. Falling action is where the conflict starts being worked out or resolved, leading to the ending or resolution, which is our conclusion. Having said this, the best thing you can do for your story is to keep the plot interesting. Perhaps you can try to add a little twist or surprise at the end. If you want to communicate fast-paced action, keep your sentences and paragraphs short. Death now looks like a choice. Suddenly, I was filled with hope. I swung a fist at his face and caught it by surprise. He let go and staggered back. This was my chance. I reached for my sword and picked it up and swung. Also important to your story are characters. Characters are the persons who are involved in this story. An important rule to observe in creating characters is that your characters must always be believable. Now, even if the character is like no one you or I have ever met, we should be able to feel that such a character could exist. Characters must also act consistently. Does that mean that the character acts the same way all the time and is boring and predictable? It certainly does not. What does it mean? Let's look at an example. Your story should have a central or main character. He or she is known as the protagonist. The person in the story who is in conflict with or who opposes the main character is known as the antagonist. Just like the person who won't stop antagonize you is your antagonist. When writing your story, you have several ways of revealing your characters to us. His or her physical appearance, the thoughts, speech, and actions of the character, or the thoughts and feelings about the main character by the other characters in the story. So knock yourself out and enjoy creating interesting, diverse characters. I only have two things to caution you about. 1, do not provide information about the characters that does not prove useful to the outcome of the story. Sure, a physical description is useful, but do we really need to know that her hair was long down to her waist and her eyes were big, beautiful, and brown? Provide only essential details. 2, limit the number of characters you invent. If the character isn't essential to the story, forget him. Remember, you have limited time and space in which to craft your story, so leave out all non-essentials. You also need to establish a context or setting for your story. Setting plays an important role in the success of stories as it helps in setting the reader's mood. There are several elements to consider when developing the setting of your story. Place. That is the geographical location. Where is the action of the story taking place? Time. When is the story taking place? What time of day? What year? Weather conditions. Social conditions. What are the daily lives of the characters like? Mood or atmosphere. What feeling is created throughout the story? The theme is another important element of your short story. And the theme of a story is, of course, its main or central idea. Very often, the theme presents some important life lesson or value that the writer wants us to learn, or highlights the author's thoughts about a topic or view of human nature. The title of the short story usually points to what the writer is saying, and he may use various figures of speech to emphasize his theme, such as symbols, allusion, or irony. From whose point of view is the story told? A story can be told by a narrator who is a character in the story, who uses I or we to tell his tale. This is known as first-person narration. And the benefit of using a first-person narrator is that this is the easiest way of getting into a character's head and really understanding his thoughts and motives. But the strength of this type of narration is also its weakness, since this type of narrator is limited in his ability to describe the thoughts and feelings of other characters. The story can be told by a narrator who is not a character in the story, from what is known as the third-person point of view. Very often, third-person narrators who speak using he, she, or they can give a wide perspective of events and actions without the bias that a first-person narrator may have. Many times, though, in the stories you are asked to write for your CSEC exam, the type of narrator you should use is decided on in the question. Look at this example from the June 2001 paper. Although I felt sorry for him, I don't think he deserved a second chance. Write a story which includes these words. The narrative voice has already been decided for you. First person. Look at this one. Hero or heroine for a day. Write a story on the topic above. In this case, you are free to choose. I point this out, however, because students sometimes make the error of writing a story using a narrative voice that does not fit the sentence they are given to include in the story. And you see, you cannot change the narrator in the middle of the story. So make sure you look carefully at the question before deciding who you are going to use to tell the story. The title is the name given to the story. In writing your short story, make sure you give a title that will grab your reader's attention and give an insight to what the story is about without giving away too much information. You still want an element of surprise to your story, right? Having looked at the key elements, let's talk about some of the ways you can make your story aesthetic, pleasing, entertaining to read. That is your objective after all, isn't it? Nobody wants to read a boring story. Nobody wants to read a predictable story. And no one wants to read a story that is unimaginative, that begins like 1,000 other stories. It was a bright sunny day, or there was a girl who lived in a town called Smithville. You're bored already, aren't you? Well, imagine what the examiner who is marking your paper will think if you begin in this or similar ways. Let's have a look at some intros to stories written by some students. The sun was sleeping. The full moon was shining brightly, but it was blocked by trees that towered over me. Fear gripped my heart and refused to let go. I was running, but I was tired, and that was slowing me down. I could hear the beast's footsteps as he drew closer and closer until I could smell his foul breath as I felt it in warm puffs against my neck. Then at last I felt his iron grip around my arm. Now I like this introduction because it gets us right into the action without too much delay, instantly arousing our interest. Well, it aroused my interest. Here, the writer is obviously focusing on the action. How about this one? Before me, the road stretched endlessly, needling to a fine black point where it kissed the rolling dark clouds of the distant horizon. A street light flickered, drawing eerie shadows in the soft pools of yellow light that covered the ground. I swayed again, and my head throbbed painfully as I struggled to regain balance. Too much vodka, I thought giddily, as the blurred scraps of my wild party night flashed rapidly across my mind. The road below my feet felt as though it were floating in water, and any minute now I would lose my balance and topple over, disappearing into sweet unconsciousness. Then suddenly, the quiet stillness of the night splintered apart as the mighty voice of roaring thunder descended upon the earth. In the next instant, the stormy black clouds were ignited with blinding streaks of white as they split apart, releasing torrents of rain and gusts of winds that threatened to sweep me off my feet. I peered through the gray streaks of rain like blinds before my eyes, searching for some sort of shelter. I spotted an old tiny shack. I struggled up to it, battling my way through the rain, and when I reached, I practically fell into its sweet warmth. This student has decided to use setting as her emphasis in a way that makes the story come alive. She used very careful description and imagery to create a very strong impression of the scene. I have said before that a story must have characters, setting, and action. But a good story cannot place equal emphasis on all three. So think about what you are good at and decide what you will focus on in your story. The key is to keep it interesting. Now, the other thing you must consider if you want an aesthetic story is language. How can you use language to your advantage? You will see that Kelly in her story used a bit of figurative language. Similes, streaks of rain like blinds before my eyes. Metaphors, the soft pool of yellow. And personification, the mighty voice of roaring thunder descended upon the earth. This certainly adds a great deal of sophistication and elegance to the writing. Try to incorporate figurative devices in your stories. They're sure to kick it up a notch. Another aspect of the language of the story is dialogue. And whether you use dialogue or not is entirely up to you. But using dialogue poorly will detract from the overall quality of your work. If you choose to use dialogue, you must observe the following rules. Use quotation marks to indicate each time a person speaks and start a new paragraph each time the speaker changes. You cannot have two speakers in the same paragraph. What are you talking about, yelled Mark? The entire second floor is flooded. We are trapped. Quotation marks always go on the outside of other punctuation marks. Ensure that the reader knows at all times who the speaker is. Interrupt the dialogue with action. Consider this. Listen, I know he's lying. I just need a way to prove it, said Vaughn. Yeah, so do I. The question is, how do we prove it, said Carol. I think I may have an idea. Now look at this. Listen, I know he's lying. I just need a way to prove it, said Vaughn. Yeah, so do I, said Carol, twisting strands of her hair the way she does when she is thinking. The question is, how do we prove it? It was a long time before Vaughn spoke, but when he did, it was barely above a whisper. I think I may have an idea. See the difference? There's a lot more to be said on this issue, but in the interest of time, I will just list a few key reminders. Keep the plot simple. A complicated plot is likely to end up in a story that's long and twisted, or a plot that remains undeveloped. In the interest of time, do not change the scene. The action should take place in the shortest possible time. Deal with one major event or incident instead of several. Limit the number of characters. Arrest the reader's attention with the opening paragraph or sentence and sustain the reader's interest throughout. Keep the theme in mind when writing the story. Use dialogue only if it adds meaningfully to the unveiling of the plot or the development of a character. Enjoy writing your stories. Thanks for spending your time with me. I'm Fiona Porter Lawson. Descriptive writing, by its nature, appeals to the senses and awakens the imagination. It beckons you to conjure up detailed mental images, stimulating your senses to do its bidding. Descriptive writing is an art form. You are using words to create mental pictures. The purpose of writing descriptively is to allow your reader to visualize or vividly imagine the thing being described. When we describe, we use words to show rather than tell. Compare these two descriptions of a young woman. She was tall and thin. She wore a simple black dress and her black hair was pulled back into a bun. She looked around the room with a confidence few people have. She was beautiful. Elegantly statuesque, she stood tall. She was exquisitely attired in a tasteful black dress that just seemed to float away from her slender form. Her midnight tresses had been smoothed back into a classic bun. Few have attained her level of confidence. She was beautiful. The second description evokes more detail rather than being a straightforward description, almost like a work of art. This is where you get a chance to show off your sophisticated language skills. Look at this next example. I was disappointed to see the home of my childhood. It was old and run down. The paint was peeling and had discolored with age. Some of the wooden steps had caved in. I used to spend hours on those steps, which brought back another memory to mind, which I now fear would be destroyed forever. My eyes searched frantically for the spot where with his very own hands, Dad had made me a swing which he carefully attached to the mango tree. It was gone. The disappointment I felt upon seeing my childhood home was indescribable. It had been reduced to a rather derelict condition, with the paint, discolored with age, disassociating itself from the wall it once dearly clung to. The wooden steps had given up the ghost and caved in with despair. I feared that the memories of hours spent on those very steps had also succumbed to the pressure of time and were forever demolished. My eyes danced frantically as they searched for the spot where my father lovingly created for me a swing which he attached to our mango tree with careful precision. It too was no more. Notice how much stronger the disappointment seems in the second paragraph, though they both communicate the same basic information. Here's how we do this. Appeal to the senses. Remember, there are 5 senses, not just 2 or 3, so we want to create several different types of imagery that will appeal to the different senses. The first and most obvious one is visual, appeal to sight. When trying to create visual appeal, focus on things that would strike the eye, color, pattern, interesting sights, and then describe them in a unique way. A good idea is to try to compare what you are describing with something else. That's right. This is a good opportunity to use up your similes and your metaphors. Let's say you wanted to refine the description of the paint on the wall in our model paragraph. You could say the paint, once the color of the beautiful morning glory blossom, was peeling and had discolored with age. Tactile, appeal to touch. How does something feel? Is it gritty, prickly, abrasive,